How well prepared are today's schools for a cyber attack? A few weeks ago, the Canvas breach affected nearly 9,000 institutions and exposed data tied to roughly 275 million users globally. Since then, schools have been scrambling to deal with the fallout. Welcome to Beyond Cyber, where we explore the most important technology trends. In this episode, we're unpacking what the Canvas incident has revealed about how cybersecurity threats in education are evolving, what schools can do against attacks like business email compromise, and the areas where schools may still be underestimating the operational risk. Joining me today is Mike Sanchez, UDT's CISO and SVP of Cybersecurity Solutions. Mike has spent more than a decade helping hundreds of organizations detect, respond, and remediate cyber attacks. Mike, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here with you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my first question for you is, one thing that's really stood out in conversations around the Canvas breach is how much focus there's been on everything that happened after the exposure itself. According to IBM's X-Force Threat Intelligence Index, credential abuse was involved in 30% of all incidents in 2024, for example. Can you walk us through what the immediate and longer term risks are with an incident like this one? How
Yeah,
does this kind of exposure become so operationally dangerous for schools even after the incident has been deemed resolved?
I think the biggest risk isn't just the breach itself, right? It's the after effects and what type of data was exposed. I mean, we understand from publicly available information that the company impacted reached a settlement with the bad actors, right? But you know, bad actors aren't necessarily trusted that well, and I really don't. I don't. So I always assume that the data is still out there. So the after effects is it's safe to assume that we can expect to see an increase in the amount of data used to fuel phishing attacks or phishing attempts, impersonation attacks that we're seeing quite often. Those have really taken off, especially with the use of AI, both from the standpoint of incoming emails or individuals impersonating an IT department or a CFO or a CEO. Uh, uh, so they're leveraging that quite often. And this deal with business email compromise. Um, we think that this event, the Canvas event, we think used a combination of techniques and tactics. Um, and it's quite common now for these guys to use different attack vectors and different techniques in order to target different organizations. One of the techniques that we're seeing really take off is the use of this business email compromise, which usually comes in through an email phish campaign, and they're usually, the focus there is uh, uh, to try to steal credentials or try to get users to do some type of fraudulent transaction. Right? Hey, you've got an outstanding invoice. It hasn't been paid for more than 60 days. You need to do this like right away. And people panic and they pay the invoice. And so it's once you pay that invoice, the FBI themselves will tell you you can just say goodbye to that money. It's very hard to recover. These guys are very good in terms of setting up the way that they impersonate their domains. Um, so that's what I'm worried about now, the after effects and how we're going to see that those stolen records being used for the after effect. The follow up attacks against the very same schools that they probably targeted already before. They stand a I would say between a 45 to 60% chance of being hit again with a similar attack.
It seems like there's a lot there to unpack, and it's a really scary world for education right now, being a target of these attacks. What is it about education that makes it such an attractive environment for attacks like phishing and impersonation?
Well, imagine the number of data records that the school districts and the higher education organizations have, right? Historically. So the data pool and the data sets that these people can reach into is significant and it's very attractive for them. It offers them a great base of user information or um, confidential information that they can exploit later on. They can buy these straight out of the public domain, uh, and so um, the education, the K through 12 educate and higher ed, uh, they have a tendency of having an open environment, right? It's a way for people to come in and learn about different things. So they have this legacy and historical point of view of this is open to everyone and publicly available. It's a learning environment, so it's prone to being exploited. And so some of these school districts and education organizations, they have a lot of legacy systems they have to contend with. And these bad actors know that they have challenges. The school districts and the higher ed, they have challenges with budgetary issues, right? Every year, so they can't close the gaps or those legacy IT infrastructure uh, that are still lingering. And so it presents a very attractive environment for them to target always.
Yeah, and you hit on this a little bit. So, just how operationally dependent schools have become on digital systems, right? And the fact that many schools are using these legacy systems, right? Learning
Yeah.
platforms, communication tools, cloud services, all of these things are very deeply connected and are all doors into a
Yes.
school's IT environment, right? So, in your
Yes.
experience, do you find that schools fully realize just how operationally complex their ecosystem is, and how the complexity of managing that ecosystem, and what are some of the visibility gaps that they're usually surprised to discover?
So I think for the most part, I think they're aware um, that the infrastructure that they have, there's shadow IT everywhere across the higher ed and K through 12 school districts. Remember, they're most of these folks are inheriting that infrastructure. In some cases, they're massive, right? We have customers here that are in the top five in terms of school districts. These are when we talk about educational systems, we're talking about enterprise level infrastructure, massive sizes. You have systems that are integrating with other systems, and they haven't been fully mapped out. They have limited resources. Their skill set is may not have the same experience level that a more mature IT or IT security department would have. That you may find over in the commercial space, right? So they're challenged all the time in terms of trying to be proactive and putting in place all the hardening requirements that they need to protect themselves and to limit their risk exposure overall. So they there's a tendency to get overwhelmed when they walk into these infrastructures. There's a lot to do. Where do I start? What do I prioritize my efforts on? How do I work within the budgetary constraints that I have? Um, how do I make sure that I have a team that can support all of the efforts to make sure that my security posture is always at the highest level required? So yeah, it's a big environment um, for them to take care of. There's a lots of challenges along the way, and it makes them an attractive target for bad actors, right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And to no fault of their own, obviously. I mean, you can only work with the budget that you've got, right? And schools are notorious for being able to spread their resources in the
yeah,
most strategic and effective way that they possibly can. But at the end of the
yeah,
day, if you don't have enough of the tools, the manpower, the expertise that's needed to fight against these attacks that are coming
that's
at
right.
you all the time, I mean, you're going to run
Right.
into trouble, right? So it sounds like
So
it's, awareness, visibility seems to be one
this
important role that is played in prevention. Um, so
this
thinking through having the right cybersecurity tools, the right team, right? But it seems like proactive management and proactive prevention is also a key to this. So how much of a school's cyber risk comes from that prevention component? And what are some ways that schools can protect themselves from attacks like BEC?
So when I step into an environment, and this is typical of when especially in the the education segment, when I step into these environments, the typical things that I see is, and when you talk about visibility and the gaps into that visibility, is that um, there's a there is there's a there's a challenge for them to list out all the mission critical systems, right? Um, and some of those mission critical systems that might be external facing systems, which means that the public is allowed to go into a website and then log in, right? That's an external facing host. Sometimes, believe it or not, I have encountered many situations where you have teachers that are trying to do all the best they can, and they set up their own hosting environment that connects or integrates back into the school district, but that's not known to the folks that are trying to protect the environment. So just think about it. In these educational in the educational segment, all of these systems may be integrated across LMS systems like learning management systems, right? Financial portals. They might be integrated with the public libraries or with the public counties, and some of those integrations are haven't been mapped out.
Mhm.
Why? Because there's a tendency to get overwhelmed, and it all starts back to the governance, right? If you're just focusing on the tools, right, and you're trying to buy all the latest and greatest toys, right, and you have no governance, those tools are not going to work as intended, right?
Right.
So it's it this is a people process technology effort in cybersecurity. I don't know how many times I've said that. You can have the baddest, greatest SIM or SOC environment in the world, but if you have no governance and no procedures to kind of drive the effort of what you should be doing on a daily basis, that you're not going to have a good information security program. You'll never have a good strategy. You're never going to be able to have a defensible way of requiring or requesting from the board or the superintendents or the provost marshals, the things that you really need to protect you against those real threats. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, so I always take a look at the threats that are common to this space. I
Mhm.
break it down from that effort. What's going to be affecting, what do I need to deal with in terms of uh, the risk and overall threat vectors that are going to come hit me every day. And that's going to be the top three vectors in the edu space. The top three are email, phishing to steal creds, email phish to deliver malware, right? Like a ransomware or some other type of malware. And then you have the business email compromise. So if I know that my top three attack vectors are those, I better prioritize how I govern the technical controls and the procedures, right, that I have to draw up in order to manage and put in place those controls to protect me against those threats. That's I go back to that, right? It's the fundamentals.
Right.
People remain the number one target, the number one target. So you have to enhance your user training and awareness. It's like what we do here at UDT, right? And we do campaigns every month because I'm paranoid, right? That you just can't do a training and awareness test, once a quarter or just every 6 months or just once annually. That doesn't work anymore. Those are the top three attack vectors all come through email, and so you got to get your people ready
Right.
to understand how they're going to be targeted, what to look for, and how to react. And now with the advent of AI, right, makes our life even that much more crazy in terms of protecting the environment because it's being leveraged. It's a great great tool, right? It enhances our productivity and our operational effectiveness, but the bad guys are using it as well, right? We're going to see a step up in terms of the volume of email phish attempts that are coming our way, and coupled with that, uh, what we call phishing, not phishing, with a P, but phishing with a V, where somebody's going to try to impersonate someone else within your organization to try to dupe you into giving them access, unauthorized access, through a Teams chat, for instance. And we're seeing this attack more and more. Right? I mean, we've handled, in the last 2 months, we've handled 6 attacks from an incident response investigation standpoint. And it all stemmed from someone getting duped, right, from a phone call placed into a Teams chat and then providing that unauthorized access into the environment. So that's not a good day.
No, it doesn't
Right.
sound like it. So,
No.
I mean, you mentioned a few things here that have really stood out, right? People, process, technology.
Yes.
That seems like the perfect equation for finding out whether your security posture is going to be effective or ineffective, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about it? Sounds like people are important to both prevention, but they could also be the reason why a school, for example, has some of the biggest risks, right? Even well intended. So how much of that cyber risk is going to be coming from something like inconsistently managed infrastructure versus maybe an imperfect process, or through people, right? Can you talk to me a little bit more through some examples of which schools that maybe UDT has worked with, or that you schools that you've met with in the past through your experience? Which schools are doing this really well? Which ones have navigated some of these limitations to execute on their people, process, and technology in a really effective way?
Well, it starts at the top, right? So the schools that we work with that are doing well in this environment, in terms of protecting their environment and having a serious, information security program in place, are the ones that the superintendents and the boards have bought into the seriousness of what we're up against. If you don't have buy-in from leadership, you're going to have a hard time trying to get your initiatives implemented. Sometimes what I find is that leadership, they don't understand the risk factors, and they tend to put cybersecurity in a technical box,
Mhm.
right? And I think that the way that the messaging is, the presentations being done to the boards and the superintendents, they're done in a more of a technical format, and that's challenging way of trying to understand or trying to get the point across of what threats we're up against, what that impact would be to the school, and why the schools need certain different infrastructures.
Mhm.
Now, so those are the ones that are doing it well. If you have buy-in from that superintendent and the board of directors, then it just flows downhill. Then that's a disciplined approach, and it helps with the put in place the strategy. Okay, the training and awareness for users is super important. Right, like I mentioned before, I can't overstate the importance of having that training and awareness program and the procedures behind that. Um, uh, in place. I really can't overstate the importance of that. Understanding that, just imagine this: the baseline or the average, what we call fish prone ratios. That means the percentage of users that fall for a email fish campaign in the K through 12 and the higher education. The baseline there is between 3 to 4%. Just think about that. If you have an environment where you have 300,000 users,
Right.
and you're talking about, if you have a ratio of even 3 or even higher percentage points that people are going to fall for some type of email fish campaign, you're that is a number that I would not feel comfortable with. So
And it only takes
What do you,
one,
it only
one
takes
really good
one.
entry for them to be able to do something with. Yeah,
It only takes one. It's a numbers game. Why do you think it's so
right.
prevalent? Because these guys know it only takes one person.
Yep.
So, what you need to be able to quantify that risk. That's where I
Mhm.
think people also drop the ball. You need to quantify the risk and not just show. I typically see risk assessments done, or some. I wouldn't even call them risk assessments. I would call them like risk analysis done, where they
Mhm.
come up with these red, yellow, green boxes. To me, that means nothing. That doesn't mean anything because I can't quantify to the board of directors to say, hey, we have a probability, we have a 95% probability of getting hit with an email phish campaign that may contain ransomware.
Mhm.
Okay, and that 95% probability factor will impact us in a way that results in a $5 million loss or a $10 million loss in terms of cost to the organization for per instance, and it might lose us our insurance coverage. Right? I can't tell the story with red, yellow, green boxes. I need to be able to quantify that effort in a way that it makes sense to the board, right? From a strategic standpoint, and then it's up to them. When you change that interaction with the board and the people that write the check, right?
Mhm.
You're changing the dynamics because then you have buy-in. It's not just you putting down the strategy. You as a CISO, for instance, or a CIO. It's just the strategy just doesn't fall on you. Everybody has now buy-in to the entire risk strategy because you're basically asking them to either accept the risk,
Mhm.
modify the risk by putting in some type of remediation, and that remediation might mean we need more people or we need some type of some kind of technical solution to mitigate against that loss that you're talking about, or we're going to pass along that risk because we're covered by an insurance policy.
Right.
So the dynamics change. It's the basics. Once you're able to tell that story in a quantifiable way, right? Understand your threats, know your assets, what type of data, where that's residing. Those are the people that are doing it right, and they're reducing their overall risk exposure.
Yeah,
Okay?
absolutely. Because I mean, you can't protect against what you don't know, right? You have to have that
Exactly.
visibility and
And,
having
and
what really stands out to me too, that red, yellow, green, right? Like you can't do
yeah,
anything with that information. You can't protect
no,
yourself with that information. And I think even once you have the information, even if you have the numbers, right? I think there is still some lack of confidence there maybe, or lack of expertise in, okay, now what do we do, right? What actions
that's
do we
right.
take? So, as we start to wrap up here, it seems like one of the big lessons and the big takeaways is just how much risk remains in this space. Even after a security incident is supposedly resolved, right? There's still a lot of risk in the space. Education is still under fire. A lot of these issues with limited budget are not necessarily going to go away anytime soon, and the attacks will keep coming thanks to AI and just the sophistication enabled by AI. So, as we kind of wrap here, what is one lesson or solution set that you think education leaders should be prioritizing right now that maybe isn't getting enough attention?
Right. So you just said a key word there about resolved. To me, resolved sometimes, and it's almost like, yeah, you know, we, we've got the we've got this issue contained in that we had recovery, but you haven't really closed the loop on the things that matter the most. I'll give you a perfect example. We still see a significant number of idle users in the environment, right? Idle users um, present a big risk to any organization, no matter if it's an education, one that's in the education space or in the commercial space. Those idle users, just think about the number of breaches that have occurred over time. There's a huge data set of user information out there that contain credentials, username information, personal information that have been stolen in previous attacks. I don't want to mention like the bigger ones, like for instance, I'll give you an example. Just think about the breaches that LinkedIn had, or that Yahoo had, Sony. All those are just data sets that have been collected over time and are sitting out there in the public don't in the public dark web, the infamous dark web. And those data sets, all of these guys, they go out and buy this information, and they use that user information to try to do what we call password spray attacks or brute force attacks, where they try to, hey, I got this data set of all of these users for this organization or institution, and I'm going to try to see if they're still valid, right? And so those idle users might be part of that list that were part of a prior breach. Number one, you shouldn't allow your users to sign up for third-party sites like Google or Yahoo or LinkedIn. They shouldn't be using their organizational email address. Right? That should be preventable. You should not. That should not be allowed, because once that information is stolen, guess what? Now your domain is exposed out there. Now, so all these bad actors, they try to use all those records that have been stolen previously, in order to try to do those brute force attacks, to try to go into a website that's publicly facing, or to try to flood you with email phishing campaigns to see what hooks.
Mm-hmm.
So clean up your idle users. I can't stress that enough. You should be doing that like tomorrow. Clean up the idle users from your environment, especially the ones that have privileged access. Why, if you have a user or a contractor that had admin privileges and they're no longer with you, then disable those accounts so they're not, that you're limiting your exposure significantly once you start doing that. Make sure that your MFA, right, you have multi-factor authentication enforceability across your admin or privileged accounts, right? Not only just your user base, but that also limits your exposure. And the way that that MFA is used and set up, there's something now being used called fish prevention MFA. It's a new protocol that kind of takes away the human interaction when that authentication challenge is presented. So it no longer relies on the user entering a challenge or entering a code. Right? So gotta enhance and fortify that authentication. Register the PCs or the devices that people are using, because you can use that as an additional layer to authenticate, right, the user coming into the environment. Uh, pay attention to which countries you allow telemetry from. If you are operating in the U.S., right, why would you have or provide access for someone that's trying to come into your environment uh, from outside the U.S. unless there's a business purpose for it? Right? Pay attention to those geolocation configurations on your emails, on your firewalls. Right? We often see all of these countries open. It's no longer, the best practice used to be limit that list to to those countries listed on the OFAC country list. That's not the rule anymore. Exclude everything outside the U.S. and only limit access, right, to those countries that there's a business purpose behind it.
Right.
Okay, and then once you do that, there's things like conditional access, where there are certain policies that you can write up to allow, let's say, employees that are traveling, they need to access systems. Well, then you have a conditional access policy for vacation, for people that go on vacation, so you're not opening up the entire country. but you're allowing, you know, access to that one user when they're traveling in order for them to access the environment. These are simple things that just go unchecked on a daily basis, right? That can limit it, and it all goes back to your procedures. You probably have the technology platform in place, but there's nothing governing the oversight and the usage of how you put those controls in place. And then I can't state this, enough. Training, training, training. You know, in the real estate market, it's always about location, location, location. This is all about training, training, training. Make your users paranoid. You know, trust nothing at this point,
Yep.
and make them aware of what they're looking for. Because this thing is evolving. You know, we had a recent we do testing here at UDT. We do it on a monthly basis,
Hmm.
um, and uh, because the attack vectors are always evolving, and the way that these guys are using the attack vectors. One of the attack vectors uh, that is being used prominently now also is, you know, those nice QR codes,
Hmm.
right? So
Yep.
it's so easy for bad guys to put a label on those QR codes. Let's say when you're parking somewhere and you're being rerouted to some other location where you're giving up your payment information. Well, the same thing applies here. You know, we did a test recently where we put a QR code in an email because now they're using QR codes along with the malicious link. You know, that little link they used to show up. Well, now they're adding a QR code, and guess what? People were using their phones to snapshot that QR code.
Yeah.
And once you snapshot that QR code on your phone, there's no
That's
way
it.
of us controlling that
Yeah.
because there's no antivirus solution in the world that can look into that QR code to let us know whether there's some malicious code there or it's rerouting you to a malicious
Yeah, and there's
site.
none of the traditional, like, looking at the link to see
No.
if there,
Yeah.
anything's funky with the link. There, it's
No.
just it's symbols, so you can't really tell.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
So
just
yeah,
avoid
that's
QR codes. They're
well.
all
I
cost.
mean, I wouldn't say avoid it. You know, it's hard to get away from the QR codes, but it's got to be. You know, make sure that it's a reputable QR code coming from a reputable location. Take a look at the domain at the top to make sure that it's not being impersonated. Right. It's
Yeah.
uh, the transposition of characters, right, in the domain. That's one of the things that you can't get away from, and it's a if you're a bad actor, it it's hard to use your legitimate domain unless unless you've already gained access into the environment and have taken over a user's account. It's very hard for you to send an email message with your real domain attached to it. So it's you got to be taking a look at that domain to make sure that it's correct. For these payment, the ones that we see prevalent. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. I'm
No,
sorry,
you're fine.
real quick.
That's what this is
But
for.
if you're, these emails that have that urgency for you to make a payment or do a wire transfer, make sure that you have a an additional layer of control there to say stop and verify. Call, pick up the phone and don't call the number that's on the email because that might be the number for the bad actor. Call the number you have on file,
Yep.
right?
I
And
do that for
verify,
myself. Just, I get a call from OUC or IRS, right? Like I never pick
right?
it up, even if it says that's what it's from. I always let it
Yeah,
go to voicemail, and then I look up the correct number based on what the official website says or my official documentation, and then you call them back that way and say, hey,
absolutely.
did you try to call me for something? Oh no, you didn't. Okay, well this
Yeah,
number tried to call me and it said in the voicemail it was you. So
yeah,
absolutely due diligence and really every
yeah,
aspect of communication, I think is going to be one of the best ways to just protect yourself and just
absolutely,
having that awareness.
absolutely.
Especially with AI, we see it now, and we'll have to do an episode where we talk through AI and maybe security um, perspective on AI and some things to look out for there. But especially with AI, I mean, we see all the time people sharing videos and then, wow, look at this video, look at this thing, look at this
Yeah,
website. There's a lot of people out there, just they're able to throw up a website. They can make it look like whatever you want. You don't need to be a coder anymore to be able to create a website, thanks to some of these
Yeah.
big AI tools out there. So it's very easy, I think, for people to get caught in the clutches of these bad actors that are putting these things
Yeah.
out there. So
Absolutely.
definitely that awareness, being having visibility
Yeah.
into just how things are evolving for your industry and also outside of your industry, I think is important. Um,
Yeah.
with the onset of AI, for sure.
I think that the key takeaway here today,
Hmm.
right, is business email compromise and those email phishing campaigns are here to stay. You
Yep.
got to get ready for this stuff. You got to train your folks, and we can do another podcast on the other three top attack vectors that are affecting this, school districts and the higher ed. But I would say be on the lookout for these business email compromise.
Mhm.
They're not. I mean, they're significantly being used. The volume that we're seeing come across on a daily basis is incredible. So you've got to be
Absolutely.
extremely aware of what's going on there.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, Mike, thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing your perspective today. I definitely think we're going to have some more episodes with you in the future on some of these other things. And thank you to everyone listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your team or colleagues. And also feel free to let us know if there's any topics that you want to hear about. We have all kinds of experts here at UDT on every facet of technology, and we would love to take a deep dive into topics that are important to you. Until next time, we will see you on the next Beyond Cyber.